Welcome to the Power of Purity podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingrassia.
Hey guys, what up? Welcome back to the Power of Purity podcast. I'm really glad you could be with me today as we continue this new series of episodes I started last time that I'm entitling When You or Your Spouse Doesn't Like Sex. And if you were with me in the last episode, which was kind of the introductory episode of this particular series, then you know we began to talk about the reality that is so true for many couples, if not most couples, that one partner has a higher sexual desire and the other partner has a lower sexual desire. This is true for probably most married couples. And this tension or this disparity between sexual desire can often lead to misunderstanding and hurt and confusion and disorientation and hurt feelings and all this kind of stuff. And so what do we do when you or your spouse doesn't like sex? How do we manage that in a healthier way? And so that's what I'm trying to speak to in this series of episodes. And what I would like to do is I'm going to review 4 common reasons that contribute to low sexual desire for many people. And then we're going to review 9 principles that I've identified that I believe are proactive steps that people can take when and if they're ready to begin working on some of these sexual issues that exist in the context, I guess, of their own heart and life, but therefore make these issues very powerful in the context of their marriage also. So what do we do about this? These 9 principles are intended to help us when and if we're ready to begin to work on some of these issues so we can try to close the gap that might exist between you and your spouse and help you guys begin to find an equilibrium where there isn't such a disparity and maybe you can be connecting with each other through physical intimacy and sexual intimacy on a more regular basis and help you guys be healthier together maybe than you've ever been before. And before I get into these 4 common reasons that contribute to low sexual desire, I do want to reflect on just one disclaimer that I offered last time, and that is I understand that it can be either partner that is the high-sexed partner or the low-sex partner, meaning their sexual desire and interest. But I would advocate that more often than not, it is the man who is the higher-sexed person. He wants sex more than his wife, and it's the woman who is the lower-sexed individual. And because of that, as I work my way through this material, I'm going to be presenting it from the angle that it's the woman who is the lower-sexed person. But I understand and recognize that that isn't always true, and in some situations, it is the man who is the lower-sexed individual, and therefore the principles are just as true, and they do apply either way, but just for the purpose of efficiency, I'm going to present the material as if it is the woman who is the lower-sexed person in the relationship. So first, I'm going to talk a little bit about 4 common reasons that contribute to low sexual desire for many people. And although there probably are many more reasons than the ones I'm speaking to on this podcast, I've identified at least what I believe are these 4 pretty common reasons or issues that cause some women to have a diminished desire for sex or to be the lower desire partner in their relationship. So let me just quickly mention each of these 4 issues, and then I'm going to talk just a little bit about each one of them. And those 4 common reasons that contribute to low sexual desire for many women are this. Number 1, her and her relationship with her husband. Number 2, her and her relationship with sex. Number 3, her and her relationship with her body. And number 4, her and her relationship with herself. And although I do not consider myself to be an expert at all in any of these four categories, I am a licensed professional counselor and I am a pastor, but I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a gynecologist, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but I will attempt to share at least a few thoughts about each of these four issues, and then I'm going to go on to the 9 principles and suggestions that will help you take positive action if you feel that any of these 4 issues might be a reality in your life and situation. So the first reason that contributes to low sexual desire for many women is her and her relationship with her husband. And guys, let me just say this. I would advocate that who you and your wife are together sexually will be predicated upon who you and your wife are together relationally. Or said another way, if you're not relationally close and connected to one another, you will not be sexually close and connected to one another. Or here's another way to say it, sex always happens in the context of a relational environment. And the sex that happens in a relationship will be predicated upon the relational environment in which said sex is happening. In other words, if you're close to your wife, if you're connected, if there's relational warmth and relational intimacy, and if there's a sense of trust, a sense of safety in the context of the relationship, then sex will probably be an intimate, safe, mutual, connected, warm, close, trusting, and satisfying experience. But if in reality your relationship is defined by things like distance, disconnection, relational coolness, if not relational coldness, and mistrust, then sex will probably feel distant and disconnected and cool, if not cold, unsafe, and be an unsatisfying experience. In this sense, I believe sex is kind of like a thermometer that reveals the relational temperature that exists in the context of a marriage. Or sex is a kind of mirror that reflects back to you something of the reality of your relationship with your wife. Or said another way, sex doesn't lie. And the thermometer of what's happening sexually between you and your wife is probably a pretty good indicator that exposes some realities about the emotional and relational condition of your marriage. And just as an example of what I'm trying to talk about here, let me ask you guys a few questions, and I invite you to try to be as honest with yourself as you can possibly be. And again, the purpose of these questions is to help us try to connect the dots a little bit between the kind of sexual relationship that I'm having with my wife and the kind of relationship that I'm having with my wife. Because, as we've already established, who you and your wife are together sexually is going to be predicated upon who you and your wife are together relationally. So here's just a few questions and a few things to think about. How do you think your wife experiences you in relationship? Does she experience you as an angry person? Does she experience you as an emotionally distant person? Do you think your wife experiences you as a safe person? Are you emotionally available and connected to your wife? Are you verbally safe to your wife? Are you relationally safe to your wife? If you had to choose, do you think in general you make your wife feel good about herself or bad about herself? Do you think your wife feels secure in her relationship with you? Do you think your wife feels loved by you? Does she feel like she's special to you? Does she feel like she's cherished by you? And if you had to do it all over again, that you would choose her and marry her all over again out of all the women on planet Earth? Do you think your wife feels heard by you? Do you think your wife feels known by you? Like you know who she really is and what's really going on in her head and her heart and her life? Do you think your wife feels understood by you? Do you think your wife feels cared for by you, not just physically and financially, but emotionally and spiritually and relationally? Do you think you make your wife feel special? Does your wife feel that you're the spiritual leader of your relationship and your home? How do you think your wife experiences you when the two of you have sex? Do you think she experiences sex with you as more of a body-to-body thing or more of a soul-to-soul thing? Do you think your wife feels like you're giving something to her through sex or like you're taking something from her through sex? Do you think the way you have sex with your wife conveys more of a love thing to her or more of a lust thing to her? If your wife was upset or if something was really bothering her, do you think you're the first person she would choose to share her thoughts, feelings, and struggles with? Well, guys, you get the idea. If you really think about it, there's a lot more nuances and dynamics happening in the context of your relationship than might appear at first glance. And I'd advocate that all of these nuances and dynamics are affecting not only your relationship with your wife, but also your ability to be sexual together and what kind of sex you're experiencing together with your wife. But one thing's for sure, and that is that the kind of sex that's happening in the context of your marriage with your wife, more often than not, is going to be a reflection of the kind of relationship that you're having with your wife. And therefore, if you're interested in having a better sexual connection with your wife, you should also be interested in having a better relational connection with your wife. Because as you cultivate a better relationship with your wife, you'll likely at the same time be cultivating the possibility of a better sexual relationship with your wife. And by the way, for more information about this topic in general, you're invited to watch session 13 of the Power of Purity Conference, which is entitled Relational Intercourse, because this is what this session focuses on, cultivating the kind of relational environment that creates the possibility of true, authentic, connected, and intimate sex. So point one is this, you guys. If your wife is the low desire partner in your marriage, it might reveal the reality that your relationship is not where it should be or what it should be. And if you're willing to seriously work on developing your relationship with your wife, it might just have a serious impact on her sexual desire and the sexual environment of your marriage. And with that being said, we go to the second reason that might contribute to low sexual desire for many women, which is this: her and her relationship with sex. Sometimes a woman can have issues with sex itself. In other words, for whatever reason, she might be uncomfortable with sex, or afraid of sex, or ashamed of sex. Maybe she was sexually abused as a child, which represents one of the deepest hurts and pains of her life, and she's never really looked at or processed her sexual abuse or what happened to her, or she's never done any therapeutic work around it, and as a result, she's uncomfortable with sex, she's afraid of sex, or she simply doesn't like sex. Maybe she was raped at some point in her life, and she's never really dealt with her rape, and as a result, she's uncomfortable with sex, she's afraid of sex, or simply doesn't like sex. And chances are she doesn't even necessarily connect the dots between what happened to her maybe 30 years ago and what's going on in the context of the marriage today. But more often than not, you'll be surprised at how those events are connected and how one is influencing the other. Maybe she was raised in a very traditional or rigid or legalistic Christian home, and it was virtually indoctrinated into her throughout her childhood that she should not have sex, and that sex is dirty or bad, and that she should not enjoy sex, and that sex is wrong. And as a result, she simply has never been comfortable with sex, she's never liked sex, or she's been afraid of sex. Or maybe she's repeatedly been disrespected and mistreated and used and taken advantage of sexually by many men in many different relationships, and as a result, sex feels uncomfortable or dirty or shameful or unsafe to her. As a matter of fact, did you guys know that in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association, also known as the DSM-5, there's a complete section that's dedicated exclusively to various sexual disorders that can occur in both men and women, including the following 8 disorders that can occur for women. And by the way, for any ladies that might happen to be listening to this podcast, don't feel too bad about the following 8 possible female sexual disorders, because there are at least 17 listed in the DSM that apply almost exclusively to men. But for the ladies, there are at least the following 8 female sexual disorders that are possible. Number 1 is hypoactive sexual desire disorder, which is a persistently or recurrently deficient or absent desire for sexual activity. Number 2 is sexual aversion disorder, which is persistent or recurrent extreme aversion to or avoidance of or almost all genital contact with a sexual partner. Number 3 is female sexual arousal disorder, which is persistent or recurrent inability to attain or maintain until the completion of sexual activity and adequate lubrication or the swelling response of sexual excitement. Number 4 is female orgasmic disorder, which was formerly referred to as inhibited female orgasm, which is the persistent or recurrent delay in or absence of orgasm following a normal sexual excitement phase. Number 5 is dyspareunia, which is persistent or recurrent genital pain associated with sexual intercourse in either a male or a female. Number 6 is vaginismus, which is recurrent or persistent involuntary spasm of the musculature of the outer third of the vagina that interferes with sexual intercourse. Number 7 is substance-induced sexual dysfunction, which is sexual dysfunction that is caused by substance use or the use of medication. And number 8 is sexual disorder not otherwise specified, which is a sexual disturbance that does not meet the criteria of any other specific sexual disorder, examples of which might include marked feelings of inadequacy concerning sexual performance or other traits related to self-imposed standards, or it could be distress about a pattern of repeated sexual relationships involving the succession of partners who make the individual feel used or diminished by said succession of partners, or it could be persistent and marked distress about sexual orientation. So guys, the point to all this is that there are obviously many different nuances and reasons or categories that a person, both male or female, can experience significant difficulty with both sexual desire and or sexual function. Now, this principle was absolutely true for Sherry and I in the early years of our marriage. Of course, there were plenty of huge relational issues between Sherry and I that we were going to have to figure out and work on before we could be healthier together in the context of our marriage. So in other words, we had the reality of the first problem. You and your relationship with your husband. Sherry had major relational issues with me that were hindering our ability to be healthier together sexually. But the reality is that Sherry also had significant issues between her and sex that had absolutely nothing to do with me as her husband, and those issues, in fact, existed in her heart and life and soul way before she even met me. And the fact is that those issues that lived in her and held power in her soul followed her into our marriage and seriously contributed to the damage of our marriage. The fact is that Sherry and I were both very deeply broken people in and around our sexual selves before we even met. And therefore, when we finally did meet and we ended up getting married, we were essentially doomed to be a sexual disaster together because of the brokenness that already existed sexually in both of us as individuals. But for our purpose here, our story affirms this principle that sometimes a woman can have issues with sex itself. If you've heard our story, you already know some of this. But Sherry had issues in her family of origin. She was raped when she was 13 years old, which was her first sexual experience. She was rather promiscuous through her teenage years, and she had an unwanted pregnancy and abortion at the age of 17. And it was the accumulation of all these bad sexual experiences that essentially left her in the place where she hated herself. She felt a deep sense of shame around herself and around the issue of sex, and she was very sad and depressed most of the time, and all this led to her 2 suicide attempts at the ages of 18 and 19 years old. And all of this because of her relationship with sex and her experiences with sex and what all of this had done to her. Or said another way, Sherry had huge issues between her and sex itself. And I'm just telling you guys, as a therapist, as a pastor, I'm suspicious that much of the time, women who have a very, very diminished sexual desire and they don't enjoy sex, they don't want sex, they resist against sex, it has something to do, much of the time, with them and sex. The reality is that people have had things happen to them in this broken world. People themselves have done things that they're deeply ashamed of, and they've never, ever dealt with these issues, these root issues in their story, in their heart, in their life. And this stuff has followed them into their marriage. And if you could see people's souls, it's as if they have chains on the inside of them, holding them in places of captivity and bondage and prison and shame, you see. And God wants to do a deeper work in people's hearts and lives and break these chains and set them free from all this junk and all this shame of the past so they can come present into their marriage and begin to enjoy sex the way God intends it to be in the context of their marriage. So the good news is that despite all the pain and all the hurt and all the brokenness and disorientation that has occurred in people's lives and that occurred in my wife Sherry's life around the issue of sex, my wife Sherry, was an incredibly brave and courageous person. She was willing to do the therapeutic work necessary as she began to face her story and enter her story and process these things that were still alive and holding power in her soul. You see, she had never dealt with her rape. She never dealt with family of origin issues. She never dealt with her promiscuity or her abortion. And as she began to deal with these issues that had so wounded her life and her soul and her sexuality, and because she was willing to do this hard work, she began to experience profound healing from the deepest wounds of her life, and she made peace with herself, and she made peace with her past, and she made peace with her shame, and she has become the most awesome, beautiful, feminine, and healthy woman that God always intended her to be. And I can't tell you what a huge, significant, monumental difference it has made in the context of our marriage and who we can be together and who she can be with me as my wife, and even who she can be intimately and sexually with me. You see, because she did the work that was necessary between her and sex itself. So please, friend, know and believe, if you're listening to my voice right now, and if you've struggled with issues between you and sex, that there is hope, and there is healing, and there is redemption available if you're willing to begin to deal with your issues and do the work that's necessary for God to bring His deep healing into your heart and life. And that brings me to the third reason that might contribute to low sexual desire for many women, which is her and her relationship with her body. And the fact is that sometimes a woman can have issues happening literally in her physical, natural, organic body that affect her sexual desire and or her relationship with her sexual self. And as a result, she may struggle on a spectrum from very diminished sexual desire to virtually no sexual desire at all. And as previously noted, I've already mentioned at least 8 possible female sexual disorders that are mentioned in the American Psychiatric Association DSM-5 manual, and at least 3 of them concern difficulties that can happen between a woman and her own physical body. Number 1 was female sexual arousal disorder, which is the persistent or recurrent inability to attain or maintain until the completion of sexual activity and adequate lubrication or the swelling response of sexual excitement. Number 2 was dyspareunia, which is persistent or recurrent genital pain associated with sexual intercourse in either a male or a female. And number 3 was vaginismus, which is recurrent or persistent involuntary spasm of the musculature of the outer third of the vagina, which interferes with sexual intercourse. So you see, guys, sometimes a woman has an issue with her body where literally physically she's unable to lubricate, or there's literal pain in her body caused by sexual activity or sexual intercourse, or there's these issues of spasms. So there's something going on in her body that's making it very difficult, and these things therefore work together to cause low sexual desire. Then in addition to these issues of physical pain, there can also be other issues such as birth defects or hormonal imbalance that can make it difficult to impossible for some women to enjoy sex, even with their own husband. For example, there's a condition called ambiguous genitalia. It's a birth defect where the outer genitals do not have the typical appearance of either a man or a woman. In such cases, a woman can have such an enlarged clitoris that it actually looks like a small penis. And in such cases, an infant girl may actually be mistakenly thought to be a boy at the point of birth. Other female developmental disorders include conditions when a baby girl may be born without a vagina or have the vaginal opening severely or completely obstructed, or be born with 2 vaginas or a vagina that opens into the urinary tract. There's also a condition called aphalia. It's a rare occurrence when a male is born without a penis or where a female is born without a clitoris. And believe me when I say that these various physical abnormalities go on and on and on, as there are many more possible conditions and issues that I need to mention for our purposes in this podcast. But the point is simply this, you guys. Sometimes a woman can have issues happening literally in her physical, natural, organic body that affect her sexual desire and can cause her to have a very diminished sexual desire to virtually no sexual desire at all. And before I finalize this point, I'd like to mention at least one other physical issue that I believe is quite common. I think it's very common and might affect way more women than you think, and that's the issue of low testosterone. And I know that when we think of testosterone, we immediately think of it as a male hormone, but the fact is that females also have testosterone in their bodies, and they need testosterone in order to be healthy, both mentally and physically. And if you'd like more information about the effect of testosterone on females, and specifically the effect of testosterone on the sexual desire and the sexual drive of females, then I would highly recommend that you visit Dr. Kathy Maupin's website at biobalancehealth.com. And I'm going to spell that. It's MAUPIN, Dr. Kathy Maupin at biobalancehealth.com. BALANCEHEALTH.com. Dr. Maupin is a board-certified fellow of the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, is the founder of the BioBalance Health Clinics, and is the most experienced hormone doctor in the St. Louis area, and has authored the book, The Secret Female Hormone, How Testosterone Can Change Your Life. Dr. Maupin explains how testosterone deficiency syndrome, also known as TDS, testosterone deficiency syndrome, can radically affect females, including the female sex drive. She explains that testosterone is a necessary hormone for the health of women. Testosterone must be replaced in order that women look and feel young and healthy as they age. She explains how testosterone stimulates the production of growth hormones and makes women leaner, how testosterone protects, but does not completely prevent, both sexes from dementia, Alzheimer's disease, heart disease, diabetes, autoimmune diseases, and cancers. She explains how testosterone prevents osteoporosis and frailty within women, and how testosterone causes women to have positive and pleasant moods. And again, if you have any interest or curiosity about this at all, I highly encourage you to go to Dr. Maupin's website at biobalancehealth.com, and you'll find all kinds of important and enlightening information there. And I want to say a word just about why I believe so much in Dr. Kathy Maupin, you guys. I don't know her personally. I've never met her. But the main reason I'm talking about this, and I'm throwing this in this podcast, is because my wife has met Dr. Maupin. She's personally visited with Dr. Maupin, and she has experienced Dr. Maupin's bioidentical therapy. And all I can tell you guys is that it has very seriously, radically, powerfully affected my wife's life in many significant ways, including her energy level, her activity level, her sense of self-esteem and well-being, and the level of her sexual interest and desire. So I would, from personal experience, very highly recommend, whether you're a male or a female, she works with males too, guys. So if you have a sense that you might have low testosterone, low energy, low sex drive, it might have to do with the testosterone level in your body. And she does this bioidentical health on both males and females. She can help people with this, and it's unbelievable how it helps people. So if you're struggling with little to no sexual interest or desire, I might recommend that you visit with your doctor, have a checkup, or visit with Dr. Maupin if you're in the St. Louis area, or if you're not in the St. Louis area, find a similar bioidentical hormone doctor in your area. You might want to contact Dr. Maupin in St. Louis. Maybe she can refer you to somebody, and that you have a serious evaluation done on your physical body and your physical health, because there's no doubt that your relationship with your own physical body can and will and does have a direct and profound influence on your libido and your level of sexual desire and interest. And with that being said, you guys, I see from the clock that I'm out of time today, so I'm going to go ahead and bring this episode to a close of the Power of Purity podcast. Please come back and be with me in our next episode, and we will continue with the fourth reason that some people have diminished sexual desire. And I'll look forward to seeing you guys in our next episode. God bless you and have an awesome day.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.